82 years old, and most people who know me will tell you the same thing. Mary Ellen Cole is a woman with backbone, strong, the kind that endures. I spent 3 years alone on a homestead claim in the Nebraska prairie. No neighbor within a day's ride, no reliable post, no husband, who had gone off for work and did not come back. And I came out the other side. People say it with respect. I have accepted that respect for 50 years because explaining was harder. But it is not the surviving that haunts me. It is what the silence did, what it made of me in those 3 years when there was no one to see me and nothing to push back against. I have never told a living person what those years were actually like inside. I'm telling it now. I was born in 1850 in Pike County, Ohio, in a family where there was nothing extra, no extra money, no extra words. My father grew corn and kept a few hogs. My mother ran the house as though any given day might be the last one with enough to eat and enough to burn. There were 4 of us children. I was the oldest. In our house, feelings were not spoken of as something apart from work that needed doing. Grief meant you went and split wood. Fear meant you checked the root cellar. It was not cruelty. It was a way of surviving. And I grew up with that way in my bones. I met William Cole in 1871. He had come up from Kentucky with his brother, both of them looking for land. William was tall, quiet, with hands that clearly knew what work was. I was 20 years old. I was not waiting for romance. I was waiting for a man you could build something real with, and he seemed like that kind of man. We married the following spring, 1872, in a small Methodist church, and I moved into his brother's house while we saved toward something of our own. The first years we lived in eastern Ohio, renting land, putting money aside. William worked hard. So did I. We had a son, Thomas, in 1874, then a daughter, Clara, in 1876. Life was difficult but comprehensible. Talk of the West began in 1877. Not just us. Everyone was talking then. The Homestead Act gave 160 acres to anyone willing to live on the land and work it for 5 years. William went out to Nebraska to look, came back with a brightness in his eyes I had not seen before. Good soil, he said, deep topsoil. This is where a person can start properly. I listened and thought about the children, about winter, about how far that was from Ohio. But I did not object. I believed him, and the land did seem like a real chance. In the spring of 1878, we filed a claim on a parcel 20-some miles northwest of where Milford would be, along a small tributary of the Blue River. Good water there, a few trees along the bank, open prairie in every direction. William cut sod for the house. I cooked, watched the children, hauled water. We both understood what it was going to cost. But money was short. William had borrowed from his brother before we left Ohio, and that summer a letter came. The brother needed repayment sooner than agreed. His own situation had gone bad. At the same time, it became clear we could not last until the next harvest on what we had. William said, "I need to go for a few months, find wages, settle the debt, buy seed for spring. The children would stay with his sister in Omaha. Better for them there, a school, not alone on the plains. You hold the claim. You have to live on the land 5 years, or they take it back. A few months. Back by Christmas at the latest. Back by spring for certain." I agreed. I don't know now exactly what I understood in that moment and what I did not. I understood he was leaving. I understood I would be alone. I understood it was necessary. What I did not understand was what alone actually meant. When you have never been truly alone in your life, people around you from the day you were born, voices, noise, the sound of someone else breathing. You do not know what it is. I thought I knew. Thomas and Clara were taken to Omaha at the end of August. William left a week later. I stood in front of the sod house, 4 walls cut from prairie dirt, 1 room, earthen floor, and watched the wagon go east along the track till it dropped behind the roll of the land and was gone. The sky was enormous. The wind came from the north. I went inside, put water on to boil, and thought, well then. In the corner, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was a small hand mirror in a wooden frame. I'd brought it from Ohio. Not the most necessary thing, but mine. The first weeks I worked the way you work when you need not to think. September was still warm and there was enough to do. Finish chinking the walls, laying fuel for winter. Out on the plains there's little wood. You burn twisted hay and dried dung mostly. Store potatoes and turnips in the cellar. Check the roof before the rains. I had 1 cow and some chickens. They needed watching. Letters from William came infrequently. The nearest post was in Milford, and Milford was 20 miles. Every 3 or 4 weeks I hitched the horse and drove in for flour, salt, kerosene, and a letter, if there was one. The first time, a letter was waiting. He had arrived safely, found work on the railroad. Money would come, back by Christmas or a little after. I read that letter 3 times, standing at the post window, then folded it and put it in my pocket. The ride home took 4 hours. October came with wind. Prairie wind is not the wind I had known in Ohio. In Ohio, wind moved through trees, through hills. It caught on things and turned. Out here, it came straight across the whole plain at once, and there was nothing in its path to slow it. Nights it drove against the walls of the sod house, and the walls held, but the sound was like something patient outside, testing whether they would. I slept badly from the start. Not from fear. I was not the frightened kind. My body simply had not learned what to do with that particular quiet. More precisely, with that particular combination, wind present, but no voices, a beam creaking, but no footsteps nearby. I would wake at 3 in the morning, lie still, listen, understand there was nothing to listen for, and stay awake until light. November brought hard frost. Snow came quickly and stayed, and for several days I did not go farther than the water in the stock. There was plenty to do inside, sewing, mending, sorting what remained from fall. I read the Bible, not from any particular piety, but because there were no other books. I read it start to finish, then started again. The words were familiar, but something in them shifted when you read alone, with no one to turn to and say, "Did you hear that part?" Winter passed. The letters from William came slowly, 1 in December, 1 in February. December. He was well. The work continued. He expected to be home before long. February. Still working. The debt was nearly settled. I read each one standing by the stove, then set it on the shelf next to the Bible. Christmas came and went without him. It was the first Christmas of my life I spent alone. I cooked what I had, ate it, washed the dish. Outside it was blowing hard. The cow in the barn shifted her weight, and I could hear her through the wall. It was almost company. January was severe. For several days I could not go out at all, The blizzard was such that you could not see 2 steps ahead. I burned hay, counted supplies, drank weak coffee, and waited for it to break. I understood then that words run out when there is no one to say them to. Not thoughts. Thoughts kept coming, but words, the kind that form as if for another person, those stopped. I tried speaking aloud a few times just to hear something. I always stopped myself. It seemed like a line I should not cross. February brought a letter. He would not be back before April. The work was going on longer than expected. His brother in Omaha wrote that the children were well. Claire had learned to read by syllables. I read the letter, set it on the shelf, and went out to clean the barn. It was 20 below at least. I worked with my hands moving on their own, and I thought, not about anything particular, just the prairie beyond the barn walls, the snow, the sky without a cloud, that blue that is almost white. The quiet was everywhere, and I noticed then, for the first time, just noticed it, without drawing any conclusion, that the quiet was not empty, that something was in it. I did not know what. Spring of 1879 came late. Snow lay until the end of March, then melted fast, and the ground around the house was soft and near impassable for several weeks after. I waited for William until April, then until May, and then came a letter in which he explained that the work continued and the debt was not yet fully settled, and he expected to be home by fall. By fall. He wrote it plainly, briefly, the way you write something when the decision is already made, and going into it in detail would be uncomfortable. I will not say it was easy, but I cannot say it broke me either, because by then something inside had rearranged itself so that the blow landed in a different place than it would have before. I started the second season of planting. I broke more ground than the year before. 1.5 acres now, because I had bought a thin horse from a trader passing through, an animal with a temper but willing to pull. I planted wheat, corn, a little sorghum. Sorghum holds up better in dry years. An old man in Milford had told me when I came in for flour. He had looked at me, looked at my horse, asked how much land and whether I was alone. I said, alone. He nodded as if that were a usual kind of answer and gave me several pieces of advice. I remember them all. The summer of 1879 was hot and dry. The wheat came through, not the whole of it, but enough. Corn, too. The sorghum did well. I brought it in alone, and that took weeks. And by the end of harvest, I was thinking about almost nothing except how much was left and whether I would finish before the rains. That same summer, something began to happen that I have never told anyone. Not from shame. I'm still not certain there is anything to be ashamed of. It is simply hard to explain to another person, especially one who has not lived that way. I started talking to the prairie. Not loudly, not at length. Walking to the water, I might say something to the wind. Working in the field, I might say something to the sky. Not a prayer. It was not a prayer. Just words, sometimes questions, sometimes observations, as if I were thinking aloud, but not for myself, for the space around me. I understood it was strange, but it was only strange from the outside. From the inside it was entirely natural, because the quiet out here was not mute. There was something in it that seemed to hear, not to answer, but to hear. I will not tell you what that something was. I do not know. Maybe it was only what a mind does when it goes too long without people. It looks for a listener where there isn't one. Maybe it was something else. I started doing it, and things became slightly easier. That is all. Somewhere in that summer I took the mirror down from its nail and laid it face down on the shelf. I did not plan to do it. I just passed by it one day and set it down, not because I was afraid to look, or not only because of that. Something about the way I appeared in it had begun to trouble me. Not my looks. My looks were my looks. Something in the fact that there was a face in the glass that I knew as my own, and it looked back, and between me and that face was a kind of gap that had not been there before. Fall brought a letter from William's sister in Omaha. She wrote carefully, the way you write an unpleasant thing. Thomas had taken sick with whooping cough. He had recovered, thank God, but it had been serious for several weeks. Clara was well. William had sent money the previous month. How were things there? I read that letter and sat holding it a long time without moving. Thomas had been sick, and I had not known. He had recovered, and I had not known. All that time I was plowing and talking to the wind, and he was ill in Omaha. I wrote back to her, briefly, that things were fine here. The harvest was good. I would get through winter well. Nothing more. That night I lay thinking about Thomas and about what he looked like now, 2 years on. He was 7. I could not put his face together properly in my mind. I remembered the face he had when he left. 5 years old, round, a little frightened. That face was different now, and I did not know in what way. The wind in the walls came steady and even. The quiet was inside it, as always. The second winter was different from the first. Not harder, about the same, maybe a little lighter in terms of cold. I knew now what had to be done, and when. I knew how much hay burned in a week, when the barn needed patching, how to set the shutters before a storm. My body had learned the order of things, and in one sense it was easier because I no longer had to think through everything as I went. But that meant there was more room for something else. Not deliberate thought, not reflection on any particular subject, more like the same thoughts moving in a narrower and narrower circle, and noticing things I had not noticed before because there had always been too much noise to notice them. I began to notice, for instance, that I moved differently, slower, or more exactly. I wasted nothing. If I needed the bucket, I picked it up just as needed and carried it just as needed. No extra motion. I thought at first it was only fatigue making me economical, but it was something else, as if a year alone had worn me down to some essential minimum, only what was necessary and nothing beyond. That winter I thought about William a good deal, not with longing, not with bitterness. That is important to say. I thought about him the way you think about a separate person living somewhere far off, living a life you cannot see. I had known him well, or believed I had, before he left. Now 1.5 years had gone by. I had changed in that time, and he had surely changed too, only differently. We were both moving, only in different directions. I turned this thought over calmly, the way you turn over a plain fact. It did not frighten me, but I held it. Letters came rarely in winter. Roads were bad. Post was slow. 1 letter in December, 1 in February. In December, he was working at a warehouse in Kansas. Good, steady work. He would be able to save more soon. In February, Clara had been ill, but was better, and Thomas was growing strong. I read each of these by the stove, and felt something like vertigo at the distance. There, children, a warehouse, Kansas, an ordinary life among people. Here, me, the cow, the prairie, wind in the walls. The mirror lay on the shelf, face down. I left it there. In January there was a storm the like of which I had not seen. 2 days the wind drove snow sideways, and outside you could not make out anything beyond arm's reach. I had tied a rope from the door to the barn the previous fall. People in Milford had told me, do this always. Men have wandered in circles 2 steps from their own door and frozen. I held the rope and walked, and the wind was such that breathing was hard. The cow stood quiet. I gave her hay, stood beside her a little while. It was warm in there, the warmth of an animal, and the smell of hay and manure, and somewhere in the rafters something creaked. I did not want to leave, but I left. That night I lay and thought, if I die here, no one will know for several weeks. It was not panic, not despair, just a sober fact. Earlier that thought would have frightened me badly. Now I considered it the way I considered weather. Here's the storm. Here's that possibility. Here I am, still living. Morning came gray and still. The storm finished. I got up, lit the stove, boiled coffee. The quiet after the storm was its own kind. It did not press, did not worry me. It simply stood. I sat with my cup and listened to it, and there was nothing in it I needed to hide from. In the spring of 1880, William did not come. A letter arrived in April. Work continuing, debt almost clear. 1 more season. 1 more season. He wrote it with confidence, briefly, the way a man writes when a decision is settled and laying it out at length would be awkward. I will not say it was easy then, but I cannot say it undid me, because by that point, something inside had shifted so that the blow arrived in a different place than it once would have. I started the 3rd season of planting. I had the horse. I had the ground already partly broken. I planted wheat, corn, sorghum again. The sorghum had done well the dry year before, and I trusted it now. I knew this land the way you know your own hands, where the moisture stayed longer, where it dried fast, where the sod ran easy. That knowledge had come without effort, simply from being here long enough and watching. But something else had come along with that knowledge. Something in how I thought about myself had begun to shift, not in a bad way, or not entirely. Simply the Mary Ellen who had come here in 1878 with a husband and children, that woman had known who she was through other people. She had not been able to say who she was except in relation to someone else, William's wife, Thomas and Clara's mother, the Haight's daughter from Pike County. Those things were true. They had not disappeared. But when there was no one present to confirm them, they stopped being the only answer to the question. I thought about this often, especially on the long June evenings when the sun set late and the sky stayed light a long time. I would sit on the step and look west, and I would think, who is that out there in the prairie? Me, Mary Ellen. But what is Mary Ellen? Not the role, not the reflection in someone else's eyes, but on its own. I did not know the answer, and that not knowing did not frighten me the way it probably should have. In July of 1880, a young man rode through on horseback, asked if I had seen any horses. 2 had gotten loose from a herd. I had not, but I offered water. He dismounted, watered his horse, drank himself, thanked me. We talked maybe 10 minutes, then he rode on. After he left, I stood in the middle of the yard and did not understand what was happening to me. Not grief, not gladness. Something like dizziness, only not in the head, in the chest. As if in those few minutes of talk, something in me had opened that had been shut a long time, and now it was closing back, and the closing was painful. I went inside, put water on to boil, and sat without moving until it came to a boil. That troubled me, not the conversation itself, but how I felt after it, as if living people had become, not foreign exactly, but unfamiliar. Too loud, maybe, too filling of the space. I understood that the prairie and the quiet had made me accustomed to themselves, or I had made myself accustomed to them. And what that habituation was exactly, I was not sure. Fall came. The harvest was decent. I put up what I had. I wrote to William's sister. I wrote to William. The letters back were shorter now, less frequent. In October came word that he expected to be home the following September, once the season's work was done. September. Over a year more. I read that letter outside, standing by the fence in the late afternoon light. The prairie ran out flat in every direction. The grass had gone brown and dry. I stood there a while, then went in and started supper. I was not angry. I was not much of anything. I was simply where I was, and there was work to do tomorrow and the day after. That night, the wind picked up from the northwest. I could hear it finding the gaps in the sod I had not fully packed. Winter coming again. I lay in the dark and listened to it, and in the quiet underneath the wind there was, as always, something present, something that by now I had stopped trying to name. There are things that happened in those 3 years that I have never spoken of, not because they are terrible things. Some are in their way, but that is not the reason. The reason is that I do not know how to say them so that another person would understand, rather than conclude I had gone out of my right mind. Maybe I had, but that is not quite the right word either. The second winter of 1880 into 1881, my 3rd year there, I noticed my sleep had changed. Not that I slept badly. I slept enough, and I dreamed, but the dreams were not what they had been before. The old dreams always had something from life in them. People, conversations, places I knew. The new dreams had only light and space, a large open space, and I was walking through it, and there was no destination, only the walking. Sometimes I woke from those dreams feeling entirely calm, almost restored, as if I had truly rested. I would lie still afterward a long time and not understand what had worked that way. In February of that winter, my cow fell sick. I saw it in the morning when she would not eat. By evening she had a fever. I could feel it when I pressed my hand to her side. I was no veterinarian. I did what I knew, kept her warm, gave her clean water, watched her breathing. 3 days I barely slept. I went to the barn every few hours, crouched beside her, kept my hand on her side, counted her breaths. She lived. On the 4th day she stood up and began to eat. I did not cry when she recovered. But something in me at that moment, released is not quite the word, let go, not tension exactly, something deeper. I turned it over for a long time afterward, trying to understand what it was. The only thing I came to was this. For those 3 days, that animal was the only living thing near me, and I had held on to it the way you hold on to something you depend on in a way that is completely real. Here's what I have never told anyone. That night when she was worst, I spoke to her, not as an animal, as something that could hear. I said, "Don't die, I need you. I am here. I'm not going anywhere." It was different from talking to the wind I never asked anything of. Her, I asked. March came with thaw, then frost again, then warmth at last. In April, the ground began to give up its moisture. I was getting ready for the third planting, and that is when I took out the mirror. I don't know why. It had been well over a year since I had put it away. I went to the corner, unwrapped the cloth. The mirror was fine, not cracked, not darkened, just glass in a wooden frame. I held it up and looked. The face was mine. I knew that, but there was something I could not name. Not that I had aged. I had aged, of course. Something in or around the eyes, a stillness that had not been there before, as if behind that face there was less movement than there should be in a living person. I looked at myself for a few seconds, then laid the mirror back down face first. I did not pick it up again, not because I was frightened, or not only because of that. Silence is not empty. That is what I did not know before. The third spring, 1881. I knew that land the way I knew my own body, where the moisture held longest, where it dried fast, where the sod broke easy. I knew how the wind moved across it at different times of day. I knew what the sky looked like 2 hours before a storm and what it looked like 30 minutes before. That knowledge came on its own, without effort, from being there long enough and paying attention. But another kind of knowing came alongside it. Something in how I understood myself had changed, in a way I could not have explained to anyone, and still cannot, not entirely. The Mary Ellen who had come out to that claim in 1878 had known herself only through other people. Without someone nearby confirming it, the usual answers to the question of who you are begin to feel less solid, not false, just not the whole of it. Something remained when they were stripped away. I did not know what to make of that remainder. I am not sure I know now. The summer of 1881 was dry, then wet, then dry again. The wheat did well enough. I started the harvest alone as I had the 2 years before, and by then my body knew the work so thoroughly it required very little direction. I could put in a full day and realize at the end of it that I had not formed a single full thought in hours. Just the work, the heat, the sound of the stalks, the weight of the grain. In July, a young man came through, not the same one as the year before, a different one, older, with a wagon, asking directions to a claim northeast of mine. I gave him directions and water, and we talked for perhaps 15 minutes. He was from Indiana originally, moving his family west. He had a wife and a small boy in the wagon. The wife nodded at me from the seat. I waved. They drove on. I stood and watched them go until they were out of sight. Then I went back to my work. What I noticed, standing there after they left, was not longing exactly. It was more like recognition. That out there, in that wagon, was the shape of a life I had once occupied naturally. People, talk, a child's voice, a husband in the seat beside you. I had not lost any of that permanently. William was coming back. The children would come back. All of that was waiting. But in that moment it felt like something I was watching from across a distance that had gotten wider without my noticing. William's letter came in August. He would be home in September. The debt was settled. He was well. He asked after the claim, asked after me, asked to give his love to the children, then caught himself and wrote that he knew the children were in Omaha. The letter was 3 pages and took him some effort, I could tell. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and set it with the others. September came warm and then cool. I put up the last of the harvest. I cleaned the house better than I had cleaned it in a long while. I'm not sure why. Not for his sake. Not to show him anything. Just that cleaning it felt like doing something with my hands while I waited, and I needed something to do with my hands. The mirror was still in the corner, face down in its cloth. I did not touch it. William arrived in the 3rd week of September, 1881. I had known he was coming. The August letter had said so. But when I saw the wagon on the track, I did not recognize it at first. Just a wagon. Then I understood. I was standing in front of the house when he drove in. He climbed down and came toward me. He had lost weight. His hair had gone gray at the temples. He looked at me, and there was something in his face I could not read immediately. A relief mixed with caution, as if he was not entirely sure what he would find. We held each other. He held me longer than usual. I held him too. It was good. It was real. But when we went inside and sat down and he began to talk about the children, about the work, about the money, about plans, I listened and understood everything he said and responded the way you respond. The whole time I felt that strange gap, as if his voice was coming from one room and I was standing in another. He did not ask. That is the important thing to say. Not that first night, not in the days that followed. He looked at the claim, looked at what I had done to it, said it was fine work, said he hadn't expected the sorghum. He was glad to be back. You could see that plainly. He talked about the future, more acreage, another cow, maybe hire someone the following summer. I listened and thought, he sees the house, he sees the land, he sees a wife. He does not see what happened here for 3 years, not because it is hidden, because he does not know where to look. We went to Omaha for the children the following week. That ride was the first time I had been off the claim for anything other than a supply run in 3 years. And the town, even Omaha, which I had not thought of as a large place, was startling. The noise of it, the number of people on the street. I sat in the wagon and felt it all pressing in and said nothing about that to William. The children. Thomas had grown into a different boy. That was the first thing. He looked at me with a careful eye, the way you look at someone you half remember. Clara came straight at me and held on. She was 7, still small enough to be held, and I held her a long time. I thought, 3 years. I was not there for 3 years. We went back to the claim as a family. The fall was good that year, cool and clear. I taught the children what I knew of that land, how to read the weather, where to watch for water in dry weeks, how the wind changed before a front came through. Thomas took to it quickly. Clara was more interested in the creatures. She would follow a grasshopper across half a field without noticing. William and I lived side by side the way we had always lived, working together, deciding together, talking in the evenings. From the outside, it was a normal family, and in most ways it was. But that gap I had felt in the first days after his return, it did not close. It just became familiar, like a floor that is slightly uneven. You learn to walk on it without thinking until one day you stumble. He never asked, not once in all the years we lived together after. And we lived together 21 more years until his death in 1902. He never once asked, "What was that like for you? What did you think those 3 years? What happened to you out there in the quiet?" Maybe he was afraid of the answer. Maybe he did not know that was a question that could be asked. Maybe he saw something and decided it was better left alone. I do not know. I did not speak first either. I did not know where to begin, and I was not certain I wanted to begin. The mirror stayed in the corner of the sod house wrapped in its cloth. When we moved to Milford in 1885, it came with us. I put it in the bottom drawer of the chest. It has been there since. We stayed on the claim 4 more years after William came back. By 1885, we had satisfied the terms of the Homestead Act, and the land was ours. We sold that same year and moved into Milford. William opened a small trade, grain, tools, a little hardware. It did well enough. Milford had a life, a church, neighbors, fairs, conversation. I entered that life because it was what you did. People were good to me. When they learned I had held a claim alone for 3 years, they looked at me with the kind of respect I mentioned at the start. I accepted it quietly and without much detail. Thomas grew up and went north, started his own farm. Clara married a school teacher and settled in Lincoln. Both good. I have no complaint. Grandchildren came to visit in summers, loud and curious. William grew gentler with age. He was often sick in the later years. He died in December of 1902, quietly, in his sleep. I found him in the morning. That was grief, real grief. 21 years living side by side, and those 21 years were good ones in the main. I cried without holding back. But then, and this may be a strange thing to say, after his death I felt something I did not know how to name. Not relief. That is not the right word. Something more like, I am alone again, and this time I know what that is. There was no fear in it. Sorrow, every day, but no fear. I stayed in Milford. The house was small, but mine. I helped at the fairs, took in sewing, kept a garden. Life was not rich, but it was enough. Some nights, quiet winter nights especially, I would feel that prairie quiet. Feel it, not hear it. Not out loud, but somewhere inside, like a stone that has been in a coat pocket so long you have forgotten its weight, until one day your hand finds it. Those 3 years I did not discuss with anyone. People sometimes asked, usually young women who were themselves thinking of a homestead, thinking of going west. I answered practically, how much seed, how to lay in fuel, what to do in a blizzard. That was all true. It was just not all of the truth. No one asked for more, and I did not offer it. The mirror came with me to Milford. It is in the house now, in the bottom drawer of the chest, wrapped in the same cloth I wrapped it in, back in 1880. I have not opened that drawer on its account for many years. I know it is there. William was a good man. I want that to be clear, because what I say next may sound like blame, and it is not blame. He worked honestly. He loved his children. He did not treat me badly. He left not out of lightness and not out of selfishness. He left because there was a real reason, a real debt, real work to be done. The circumstances were genuine. and that makes the thing more complicated, not less. I did not hold it against him, not then, not after. But this is true. When he came back to the Mary Ellen he remembered, and that Mary Ellen was no longer entirely herself, or was herself in a different way. He could not see it, not because he was blind, but because he did not know what to look for. On the outside, I was the same, maybe a little harder, a little quieter, and he put that down to years and hard work. That was also true. It just was not all of it. We never talked about what had happened to us separately in those 3 years. Not once. He would occasionally mention the railroad work, the men he had worked alongside, the towns he passed through in Kansas. I listened. I told him almost nothing. Once, this was around 1884, I think, he said at supper, "It must have been hard alone out there like that." I said, "I managed." He nodded. That was the end of it. I think about that now, from 82 years. What would I have said if he had pressed? That I talked to the wind? That there was a night I wept over a sick cow in a way I had not wept over missing him? That I looked in a mirror and was frightened, not by aging, but by what lay behind the eyes? I do not know how an ordinary person receives that. There was a gap between us, and we lived beside it for 20 years. It did not grow and it did not close. It was simply there. We were a good pair in the sense that two people are good who work in the same direction, respect each other, keep their word. I do not regret that life. But I cannot say he knew me, not all of me. Maybe no one ever knows another person complete. Maybe that is not possible. But most people do not have 3 years of silence after which they became someone else, and the person beside them never noticed the change. The quiet in the chest drawer, where the mirror is, it is the same quiet, the same thing in it. I have lived alongside that all these years the way I lived alongside the gap. You learn how. I am 82. Clara came last summer with her grandchildren, good loud children who ran around the yard and called out to each other, and I sat on the step and watched them. Thomas writes once a month. His handwriting is getting worse, but he writes. I live alone, but not in silence. Milford has people, neighbors, the church nearby, the shop on the corner. It is a different life. But that quiet, the prairie quiet, it never went anywhere. It is in me. It is not cruel, not kind. It simply is. I've thought about it much in recent years, trying to understand what exactly those 3 years made of me. Not the practical side. On the practical side, they made me better. I learned to run a place on my own, learned the land, grew harder, complained less. All of that is true, but that is not the important part. The important part is this. The Mary Ellen who went out to that claim in 1878 knew herself only alongside other people. She could not say who she was without someone near to confirm it. This is you. 3 years of solitude took that confirmation away from her. At first it was like losing air. And then, I don't know, something remained. Something that is me, not wife, not mother, not daughter, just myself separate. That is what I found out there, that I wish I had not found, or found, and don't regret. I still cannot settle which, because with that knowledge, it became harder. When you know you're something separate from all your roles, that is not nothing. But it means there will always be some distance between you and other people that they cannot cross. William did not cross it. I did not know how to let him, or did not want to try. The children do not know this about me. No one knows it. Silence is not empty. That is what I carry from those years. It is not empty. It is full of something I cannot pass on. Sometimes I think, if I went back, what would I do differently? I would let William go with the children without a word of objection. Yes, and again. The land was good. The chance was real. I would stay again. Not because it was right or wrong, because that is what happened. And what happened made what is, and I am what is. I do not know what I lost, because I do not know who I would have been without it. I think someone simpler, maybe happier, maybe not. The woman I was before the 18th of September, 1878, when William's wagon went over the roll of the land and was gone. She was a decent, hard-working woman. Not better than me now, not worse, only different. That woman did not know that silence is not empty, did not know what her own face looks like after a year without people, did not know that you can attach yourself to a cow the way you attach yourself to the only friend you have, did not know that in a blizzard, holding a rope in the dark, walking toward a barn you cannot see, you can feel something that is almost like peace. I do not regret knowing those things, but I would not call it a gift. They cost something. Not only me, William too, who lived beside a woman with a room in her that he never entered, not out of ill will, but because it was locked from the inside, and I never found the way to open it, or never chose to try. The mirror is in the bottom drawer of the chest, wrapped in its old cloth. I think sometimes I ought to take it out. I am 82 years old. Surely I will not spend what is left afraid of my own reflection. But every time I think it, I do not do it. Not from fear, I believe. Or not only that. In that mirror is the face I saw in April of 1881. Not aged the way I am aged now. That is not the trouble. The face with the stillness behind it. The stillness that came out of the quiet and stayed. I have lived with it 51 years. I live with it now. I will not tell this to anyone out loud, I expect. The words go badly when you try to say what there are no words for. But I have said it here, to myself at least, and that is something. The wind is quiet today. October in Milford means yellow cottonwoods and the smell of burning leaves and a sky that is high and nearly white. It is beautiful. I'm sitting by the window. The quiet outside, the town quiet, is a different thing. But there is something in it even so. There always was.